In 2018, a South African woman was declared dead at the scene of a car accident and transported to a morgue. However, when morgue staff returned several hours later, they were horrified to discover that she was still breathing inside the cold storage unit. Paramedics at the crash site had found no signs of life and assumed she had succumbed to her injuries. She was placed in a body bag and sent to the morgue's refrigerated compartment. But when a worker later checked the bodies, they noticed her chest moving, proving she had been mistakenly declared dead. The woman was immediately rushed to the hospital, where doctors confirmed that she had survived, though she was in critical condition. In 2016, an Indian man named Kamaraj may have become the first recorded person in modern history to be killed by a meteorite. Kamaraj, a bus driver at an engineering college in Tamil Nadu, India, was outside when a sudden explosion shook the area. Witnesses described a blinding blue flash followed by a shockwave that shattered windows and left a crater in the ground. When the dust settled, Kamaraj was found severely injured, and he later succumbed to his wounds. Authorities initially suspected an explosive device, but later investigations pointed to a meteorite impact, a rare and extraordinary event as most space debris burns up before reaching the ground. In 2019, a New York man found himself in a terrifying situation when he was accidentally locked inside a supermarket freezer overnight. The man had entered the walk-in freezer at closing time when a faulty latch trapped him inside. With temperatures plunging well below freezing, he desperately searched for a way to stay warm. In a bizarre twist, he discovered boxes of frozen burger patties, which he used to insulate himself, stacking them around his body to trap heat. By the time employees opened the store the next morning, he was found alive but suffering from severe hypothermia. He was rushed to the hospital and eventually made a full recovery. For over 3 decades, a prisoner in 17th century France was held under the strictest secrecy, his face hidden behind an iron mask that he was never allowed to remove. His identity was so closely guarded that even prison officials were forbidden to speak of him. The masked man was imprisoned under the orders of King Louis XIV, moving between several prisons, including the infamous Bastille. Some claimed he was the king's twin brother, while others believed he was a nobleman with dangerous secrets. When he died in 1703, all of his belongings were burned, and records of his existence were erased, fueling centuries of speculation. To this day, his true identity remains a mystery. In 2006, Jonathan Metz, a 31-year-old man from Connecticut, found himself in a life-threatening situation after his arm became trapped in a furnace while doing repairs in his basement. With no way to call for help, he remained stuck for 3 days as his condition rapidly worsened. Realizing that waiting any longer could be fatal, he made a desperate attempt to free himself. However, before he could escape, he lost consciousness due to blood loss. Fortunately, concerned friends called for help, and emergency responders arrived just in time. He was rushed to the hospital where doctors successfully saved his life and completed the medical procedure safely. Metz later recovered with a prosthetic arm. In 1971, Julianne Koepke, a 17-year-old girl, was flying over the Amazon rainforest when her plane was struck by lightning and broke apart mid-air. She fell from 10,000 feet, 3,000 meters, still strapped to her seat, and miraculously survived the impact. Koepke suffered a broken collarbone, deep cuts, and a concussion, but she was alive. Alone in the dense jungle, she spent 11 days wandering through the wilderness, surviving on rainwater and scavenged food while battling infections, insect bites, and exhaustion. Eventually, she was rescued by local loggers, making her one of the only known survivors of a mid-air plane disintegration. In 2020, a 20-year-old woman in Detroit, Michigan, was pronounced dead by paramedics after being found unresponsive at home. Her family was devastated, and her body was sent to a funeral home to be prepared for burial. However, as the funeral home staff began their procedures, they noticed movement. The woman was still breathing. Shocked, they immediately called emergency services, and she was rushed to the hospital where she was found to be very much alive. This rare case of mistaken death was later attributed to a rare medical condition called Lazarus syndrome, in which a person's heart spontaneously restarts after failed resuscitation attempts, though she was revived later. In 2015, a baggage handler at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport accidentally became trapped inside the cargo hold of an Alaska Airlines plane, and no one realized it until the plane was already in the air. The worker, employed by a subcontractor, had fallen asleep inside the pressurized baggage compartment before takeoff. When the flight took off for Los Angeles, passengers and crew soon heard frantic banging and muffled screaming from beneath the cabin. Realizing something was wrong, the pilots declared an emergency and returned to Seattle. Upon landing, the worker was found disoriented but unharmed, having spent over 30 minutes locked inside the cargo hold at high altitude. On December 7, 2007, Alcides Moreno and his brother Edgar were washing windows on a New York City skyscraper when their scaffolding suddenly collapsed, sending them plummeting 500 feet, the height of a 47-story building. Tragically, Edgar did not survive, but Alcides somehow lived through the fall, landing amid the twisted wreckage. When paramedics arrived, they were shocked to find him still breathing, despite suffering multiple broken bones, brain injuries, and spinal fractures. He regained consciousness after multiple surgeries and months of rehabilitation. 2014, a 16-year-old boy miraculously survived a 5-hour flight from California to Hawaii while hidden inside the wheel well of a Boeing 767. Desperate to escape his home life, the teen climbed into the landing gear compartment of a Hawaiian Airlines plane before takeoff. As the aircraft ascended to 38,000 feet, he endured extreme cold and low oxygen levels. Temperatures inside the wheel well can drop to minus 60 degrees Fahrenheit, and the lack of oxygen at high altitudes often causes unconsciousness. Astonishingly, he survived the journey, though he was found dazed and severely dehydrated upon arrival. In 1912, Franz Reichelt, an Austrian-born tailor and inventor, attempted to test his latest creation, a parachute suit designed to help aviators survive falls. Convinced his invention would work, he decided to personally test it by jumping off the Eiffel Tower. Despite warnings from onlookers, Reichelt climbed up the 57-meter, 187-foot tower and leaped. However, his parachute suit failed to deploy, causing him to plummet straight to the ground. The entire event was captured on film. In 1967, a psychology professor named Dr. James Bedford became the first person to be cryogenically frozen in hopes of being revived in the future. While cryonics remains highly controversial, Bedford's body is still preserved today, making him one of the longest frozen humans in history. Upon his death from kidney cancer, Bedford's body was immediately placed in liquid nitrogen, stored at negative 320 degrees Fahrenheit. Unlike modern cryonics patients whose bodies are treated with advanced preservation techniques, Bedford's freezing process was crude and experimental, leading scientists to believe that his body may not be in a recoverable state if future technology advances. Despite this, his cryogenic capsule has been carefully maintained for over 5 decades, still resting in a facility in Arizona, waiting for the day when science might theoretically bring him back to life. In 2019, a tragic and bizarre accident occurred during a funeral in Indonesia when a coffin fell from a ceremonial tower, striking one of the pallbearers, the deceased's own son. During traditional Torajan funerals, coffins are carried up bamboo ladders to be placed in high wooden towers before burial in cliffside graves. As the funeral procession lifted the coffin, the structure collapsed, sending the heavy casket crashing down. The impact instantly killed the man, turning the funeral into a double tragedy. Despite the shocking accident, the family proceeded with both burials following their ancient customs.